Welcome back. While the South African economy will start the year on shaky ground, the unemployment rate is at a record high of 34.9% and inflation pressures are mounting. So let's look at the topics that are likely to dominate the economy this year. So joining us is Commodities freelance journalist Stoddard. Thank you so much for your time this morning. There's so much to uncover when it comes to the state of our economy. I mean, we keep speaking about how we need to go back to pre-pandemic times, but pre-pandemic times means that South Africa was in a technical recession. So discussing some of those topics that will be highlighted or will be of a priority this year. Just take us through some of them.
Yeah, hi, good morning. So, yeah, some of the topics. So, obviously, the pandemic remains a major issue. And with the pandemic, there's a number of things here. One is the government's response. So, it does seem like now that the South African government has realized that the public has little patience, I would say, for renewed lockdowns. And we saw that, I mean, they lifted the curfew on December 30th, for example, and the economy simply cannot afford it. And the need for stricter lockdowns has almost evaporated because hospitalization rates and death rates in the current wave were so much lower than previous ones. So the hospitals are not being overwhelmed and the healthcare system is not being overwhelmed. So if South Africa can continue to allow, restaurants to be open and for domestic tourism to be open and those kinds of things, that's a good start compared to, say, the start of last year, for example, or obviously what obtained in 2020. But there are still supply chain issues globally related to the pandemic, and on top of that, South Africa also needs to get foreign tourists back because they bring in hard currency, and tourism is also a very labor-intensive sector. So it's very important to get the foreign tourists back.
Yeah, I mean,
that's one thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, we keep speaking about structural economic recovery plans, and we keep speaking about economic reform. But one wonders, is an appetite to actually engage and embark on that structural economic reform? Because that would mean, as government, taking a decision to be unpopular for the purpose of bettering the economy or making those uncomfortable, difficult decisions.
Yes, well, that's true. I mean, the government is in. That speaks to the politics. But I suppose, but there are things the government can do. For example, to reduce the cost of business, to reduce red tape. They can. There are things that they can even do regarding the fuel price that the Automobile Association of South Africa, for example, has suggested that they could reduce some of they could reduce taxes in certain areas, and they could make and they could revise labor laws to make it easier to lay off workers, because in that case, people the trouble is that a lot of employers don't want to hire people in the first place because it's difficult to lay them off. But the government has to work with COSATU is a key labor ally, and that makes those kinds of initiatives very difficult. But the other thing is that the government keeps talking about structural reforms, and the Reserve Bank, for example, its monetary policy committee meets 6 times a year usually, and it almost always ends its MPC statements by saying there is, monetary policy can only do so much. There is need for urgent structural reforms. And they just don't seem to happen or materialize. We are starting to see some things. So, for example, allowing companies, for example, mining companies to build their own power plants, for example, up to 100 megawatts. That's a significant move in the direction that I think a lot of economists say the policymakers need to move in.
Yeah,
but that's
In that regard, though, just for the sake of time, how are we looking for the year 2022? I mean, if I have to ask you to stare into some kind of a crystal glass or what the numbers are saying scientifically, what are the numbers saying for the year?
Well, looking ahead, it doesn't look like South Africa is going to get growth. Most of the forecasts, the forecasts for 2021 are for growth of 5% or more. Those look over-optimistic. The forecasts for this year are generally for growth of under 2%, and quite frankly, that's not good enough. The economy needs to grow at a faster pace, basically, to help address the employment crisis and other issues.
Ed, we'll leave it there for this morning. Thank you very much for your time. Ed Stoddard, they're giving us the latest in terms of exactly what we need to do to get actual effective economic recovery.